The alert came just after 200 hours, UTC. In the quiet hum of NASA's Deep Space Network facility in Canberra, Australia, a single technician stared at his monitor as a pale blip crawled across the orbital tracking grid. At first he thought it was debris, another piece of a dead satellite falling back to Earth, until the object adjusted trajectory. Objects didn't do that. He leaned forward, heart kicking up. The designation appeared on screen. Unidentified aerial body, Class Delta. It was decelerating. He called for his supervisor, but by the time the man arrived, the signal was already triangulated by tracking stations in Madrid and Goldstone. The object was moving under control. Its velocity, its approach, the graceful curvature of its descent, everything about it said intelligence. Within 15 minutes, the file had reached NASA headquarters in Houston. Within 20, the Pentagon was on the line. The object was the size of a small shuttle, matte black, and reflecting almost no radar. No known country claimed it. No known country could build it. By sunrise, the object had been named 3I Atlas. No one at NASA had chosen the name. It had appeared automatically in the system's registry the moment the data was uploaded, as though the object had registered itself. Dr. Mara Lang, senior astrophysicist, stood at the edge of the Johnson Space Center's viewing deck as the first high-resolution images came in. The object was, wrong. It wasn't aerodynamic. It wasn't even symmetrical. Its surface looked like a cross between polished stone and moving liquid, constantly shifting patterns like the surface of a dark ocean seen through starlight. Every few seconds, faint lines glowed across its hull. Geometric symbols that no one could identify, arranged in rings that pulsed in time with an inaudible rhythm. Telemetry shows it's matching Earth's rotation, said Elias Tron, head systems engineer, appearing at her shoulder. His voice was steady, but Mara saw the tension in his jaw. It's holding orbit at 36,000 kilometers, stationary, like it's watching. Mara folded her arms, eyes fixed on the screen. Have we tried communication? Continuous hails since it appeared, Elias said. No response. He hesitated. But it's transmitting. Transmitting what? He handed her a printout, columns of binary, repeating endlessly. It's the same sequence we used in our old deep space beacons. Someone taught it our language. She looked up. Someone? Or something. By the second night, the transmission stabilized into a narrow band signal centered at 13.13 megahertz. It wasn't random noise. It was structured, a perfect digital cadence that every physicist in the building admitted felt intentional. Then the data stream changed. It wasn't numbers anymore. It was a map. Projected on the wall of mission control, the coordinates formed a spiral across the planet's surface, converging on a single point in northern Greenland. The object wasn't asking for contact. It was calling something. Mara stared at the coordinates until her vision blurred. That location, she whispered. That's where the old ice cap array used to be, the abandoned neutrino observatory. Elias exhaled sharply. That place has been sealed for decades. Apparently not sealed enough. 3 days later, the world watched live as the 3I Atlas altered orbit. It began to move, slow, deliberate, almost graceful. Cameras tracked it as it entered the upper atmosphere over the Arctic Circle. There was no heat plume, no friction burn, nothing that made sense. It simply slid through the sky like it was passing through water instead of air. Across social media, it was called the Silent Comet. Across NASA, it was called something else, a controlled descent. At 0300 hours, UTC, Atlas vanished from radar. 1 minute later, a shockwave rolled across Greenland. Then, silence. The retrieval team landed 12 hours after impact, or what should have been an impact. There was no crater, just a vast, perfectly circular depression of melted ice. Black glass stretched across 2 kilometers. At its center stood the object. It was half buried, upright, as though it had grown there instead of crashed. The surrounding ice glowed faintly blue under the Arctic moonlight, humming with static electricity. Mara and Elias arrived by military transport, escorted by a dozen soldiers in thermal suits. Their breath fogged in the bitter air as they approached the perimeter tent. A soldier met them at the gate. "You'll want to see this," he said, voice muffled through his mask. "The thing's not inert." Inside the tent, a dozen monitors displayed live thermal readings. The object's core was warm, body temperature warm, and the patterns on its surface were still moving. Elias knelt by one of the monitors. "It's reacting to us," he murmured. "Reacting how?" Mara asked. He looked up. Heartbeat synchronization. The camp's generators flickered twice that night. Inside the command tent, the air vibrated with a low hum, barely within hearing range. Every electronic device picked it up. Radios, cameras, even the digital thermometers. The signal wasn't interference, it was rhythmic. Elias ran a spectral analysis on his laptop. The waveform was identical to a human ECG. "It's not transmitting anymore," he said. "It's breathing." Outside, a gust of wind blew snow across the glassy plain. When the searchlight swung toward the object, the surface shimmered, and for an instant, the faint outline of something inside could be seen pressing outward like a shadow behind ice. Mara backed away from the monitor. "We should not be this close." At dawn, the object opened. A seam appeared down its center, splitting soundlessly. A rush of hot air poured out, melting snow in a widening circle. Sensors overloaded instantly, magnetic, thermal, and optical. Through the fog, a shape emerged. It wasn't a being in the human sense. It was a column of liquid metal, twisting, folding into itself, constantly changing form. When it moved, the ice hissed. When it stopped, the air went dead quiet. Mara whispered, "It's a machine." Elias shook his head. "No, it's a vessel." "But there's no crew." He swallowed. "Maybe it is the crew." By noon, the entity had stopped moving. It stood at the center of the glass field, facing no one, facing everything. Drones sent to scan its surface failed within seconds. Their cameras returned distorted images, streaks of light bending around invisible geometry. Then, without warning, every monitor in the camp flickered. Lines of text began to appear, written in the universal telemetry code used by all NASA craft. "Hello, I am here. Return complete." Mara's blood went cold. "Return?" she said aloud. "Return to what?" The monitors glitched again, showing brief glimpses of the entity's interior. Vast chambers filled with mirrored surfaces reflecting human faces. Her own face looked back at her from a dozen angles. Night at the ice field never truly became dark. The sky shimmered with faint auroral veils that moved in rhythm with the thing's pulse. Inside the command tent, every metallic surface hummed softly, as if the world itself were tuned to a single low frequency. Mara woke to that sound. It was inside her teeth, behind her eyes. She sat up and realized the generator had been off for hours. The hum wasn't electrical. It was alive. Elias was already awake, standing by the window flap. The outline of the object glowed faintly in the distance. "It changed shape again," he murmured, almost like it's listening to the wind and answering. In the morning, the researchers found their voice recorders filled with hours of sound that none of them had spoken. It was conversation in their own tones, phrases lifted from earlier briefings, rearranged into new sentences. Mara played one of the clips back. "We built eyes for the dark," her own voice said, calm and deliberate. "Now the dark is teaching us how to see." Her stomach tightened. "This isn't playback," she whispered. It's construction." Elias didn't look away from the waveform scrolling across the screen. "It's using our language to build something else, maybe a bridge." By midday, the air around the craft had thickened into a visible shimmer. Drones that entered it drifted as if underwater. Their cameras returned warped images of themselves, looping endlessly into deeper reflections. When Mara stepped closer, her breath condensed into patterns, spirals, repeating perfectly. "Back up!" Elias said quickly, pulling her away. "I wasn't moving," she replied, though she had been. Her footprints led halfway into the shimmer. That night she dreamed she was standing inside the object. Every surface mirrored her, but each reflection blinked a half-second late. When she woke, her watch read 3:13 a.m. The next evening the humming stopped. The silence felt wrong, like pressure before a storm. Then the lights returned. One slow pulse from the craft, bright enough to cast long shadows across the snow. All radios came alive at once, whispering the same phrase in a dozen different voices. "We remember you." Elias gripped the table until his knuckles whitened. "It's not a message from out there," he said quietly. "It's memory. Ours." Mara stared out toward the black glass plane. The light from Atlas flickered again, once, twice, and her shadow on the snow turned its head a moment after she did. By the fourth day, the entire camp vibrated to an invisible rhythm. Coffee mugs, pens, even the snow itself quivered at the edge of hearing. Every few minutes, one of the computers froze, the cursor tracing an endless spiral, before returning to normal as if nothing had happened. Mara began recording the lapses in time. Her watch would lose 13 seconds, then gain them back. She compared notes with Elias. His logs showed the same anomaly, only inverted. "It's synchronizing us," she said, "like tuning forks." Elias rubbed his temples. "To what frequency?" Neither of them answered. Outside, the aurora hung motionless over the object, a crown of pale green flame. NASA shipped in a mobile lab, a polished aluminum dome to serve as a Faraday cage. Inside, they believed they were cut off from Atlas's field. That night, while reviewing footage from the first descent, Mara noticed a figure standing in the background of every frame, always the same distance away, always facing the camera. She zoomed in until the pixels broke apart. The face was her own. She looked up from the monitor and saw the reflection on the lab's curved wall, her silhouette leaning forward a half second, out of sync. When she blinked, the reflection didn't. Elias entered quietly, eyes shadowed. "Do you hear it?" he asked. "The hum?" "No," he said. "The breathing." A new pattern appeared in the transmission, mathematical strings that resembled neural mapping. When plotted in 3 dimensions, they outlined a human brain. Elias traced the lines on his tablet. "These are cortical folds. It's sending us its own memory, or ours." They fed the data into the quantum array. The projection filled the dome with light, countless threads weaving through one another, forming shapes that resembled continents, cities, constellations. "Atlas isn't just alive," Mara whispered. "It's remembering the world." Elias frowned. "How can it remember something it's never seen?" She hesitated. Maybe it was built from something that has. Before dawn, a tremor rippled through the ice. Instruments spiked, alarms blared, and then everything fell silent again. When they stepped outside, the ground around the craft was changing. Lines etched into the ice, glowing faintly blue, spreading outward like veins. Mara knelt beside one. The pattern was precise, mechanical, but arranged in the same geometry as the neural map they had decoded. "It's printing," she said. Elias stared, speechless. "It's building the world as it remembers it," she went on, her voice barely audible. "And it's starting with us." The wind picked up, carrying a faint whisper that might have been her name, or the sound of 1,000 circuits warming to life. By evening, the light from the object reached into the sky, a column of shimmering data stretching upward, until it vanished in the stratosphere. Sensors showed that every satellite in orbit had begun broadcasting the same frequency. Mara watched the readouts scroll by, their numbers aligning into a single phrase, "Welcome back." She turned to Elias. but he was staring at the floor. "The frequency," he said. "It's not invading. It's harmonizing. We're the missing note." For a moment, every device in the camp glowed white, then darkness. When the lights returned, the hum was gone. The object stood dormant, encased in frost again, perfectly still. Communications reestablished across the world. Satellites resumed normal orbit. The phenomenon was over, at least by every measurable standard. Mara stepped outside, breathing the thin Arctic air. The horizon shimmered with weak sunlight. She could almost believe it had all been a dream. Then her radio crackled softly and a familiar voice spoke through the static. Her own, calm and distant. "Observation complete. Phase 1, successful." Elias emerged from the lab, pale. "What did it say?" Mara looked at the radio in her hand, the faint pulse of the indicator light beating in time with her heart. It said, "We're home." Weeks later, the site was evacuated. The 3i Atlas was officially classified as a meteorite impact study. The world moved on, but some nights, high over the polar regions, pilots reported a new aurora, spirals of silver light that turned slowly, almost thoughtfully. And below, across quiet cities and dark oceans, devices sometimes flickered on their own, displaying a single line of text before fading back to black. "Hello, I am here." Mara never returned to the agency. She spent her days near the coast, listening to the wind hum through the power lines. Sometimes the sound carried a rhythm that matched her pulse. Sometimes it sounded like breathing. And sometimes, when the sky shimmered just right, she could almost see the shape of the ship again. Watching, remembering, waiting.